The world of NASCAR is once again at the center of significant conversations that extend well beyond the racetrack. From the hallowed halls of motorsport history to the business boardrooms that shape the sport's future, a series of developments have emerged in recent days that are drawing attention, sparking debate, and raising questions about the direction of one of America's most storied racing series. Tonight, we break down three major stories that are defining the current moment in NASCAR, stories that touch on legacy, tradition, and the tensions simmering behind closed doors at the highest levels of the sport. We begin with what should be an occasion of purest celebration. The NASCAR Hall of Fame has welcomed its newest class, and the three individuals honored carry with them decades of achievement, sacrifice, and dedication to the sport. Kurt Busch, Harry Gant, and Ray Hendrick have now been officially inducted, joining the ranks of those who have left a permanent mark on NASCAR history. Each of these individuals brings a unique story to the hall, and the recognition they received is a testament to careers defined by perseverance and excellence. This moment is, without question, a cause for appreciation and respect. Kurt Busch's career statistics alone make a compelling case for his induction. Over the course of his time in the NASCAR Cup Series, Busch accumulated 34 Cup Series victories, a Cup Series championship, and a Daytona 500 title. Those numbers represent not just personal achievement but a sustained level of competitiveness that placed him among the elite of his generation. Beyond the raw statistics, Busch was recognized for the tangible impact he had on every racing organization he joined. At Phoenix Racing, the program improved following his arrival. At Furniture Row Racing, the team's competitiveness was elevated. At Chip Ganassi Racing, the organization became more formidable with him behind the wheel. Even later in his career, his time at 23XI Racing contributed to the legitimization of that organization at a rapid pace. His career was not without controversy off the track, and those chapters are part of the public record. However, when it comes to his ability as a racing driver, the assessment from within the sport has consistently been one of elite level talent. Harry Gant, known widely by the nickname the Bandit, brings a different but equally compelling story to the Hall of Fame class. Gant compiled 18 Cup Series victories throughout his career, and while he never captured a Cup Series championship, he holds a distinction that no other driver in NASCAR Cup Series history can claim. Harry Gant remains the oldest winner in the history of the NASCAR Cup Series, a record that has stood and, as of this reporting, continues to stand unchallenged. That achievement is not a minor footnote in the history books. It is a permanent marker of what Gant accomplished at an age when most athletes have long since stepped away from elite competition. The fact that Gant was able to be present, healthy, and able to personally experience his Hall of Fame induction added a layer of significance to the ceremony that was not lost on those in attendance or those following from home. Completing the newest class is Ray Hendrick, a legend of modified racing whose contributions to the broader fabric of motorsport history made him a worthy addition to this prestigious group. Hendrick's induction rounds out a class that, taken together, represents a meaningful cross section of NASCAR's rich and varied history. However, the induction of this class has also renewed a long standing and increasingly prominent debate about the standards governing Hall of Fame eligibility. For many years, there existed what was described as an unofficial benchmark within the sport, a threshold of approximately 25 Cup Series victories that served as a general measure separating Hall of Fame caliber careers from those that were simply very good. That benchmark carried with it a certain logic. When Dale Earnhardt Jr. was inducted, he had 26 Cup Series wins to his name. When Carl Edwards received his recognition, he had accumulated 28 victories. The number gave the selection process a degree of consistency and ensured that the Hall of Fame remained an exclusive destination reserved for the most accomplished figures in the sport's history. Yet, as new classes have been inducted year after year, that benchmark has been observed to drift. Ricky Rudd was inducted with 23 Cup Series wins and no championship. Jeff Burton entered the Hall of Fame with 21 victories and no title to his name. And now, with Harry Gant's induction, the newest member of the Hall joins with 18 wins and no Cup Series championship. As noted, each of these individuals brought something distinctive to the table. Rudd's remarkable longevity and his Ironman streak stood as defining achievements of their own kind. Burton's work in broadcasting and leadership extended his contributions to the sport beyond his driving career. Gant's record as the oldest winner in Cup Series history is, as previously stated, an achievement without parallel. These are not empty careers being rewarded. These are meaningful legacies. Nevertheless, the pattern is observable, and the direction of that pattern raises questions that the sport will need to confront. honestly in the years ahead. If the bar for Hall of Fame induction continues to move in the direction it has been moving, where does it ultimately settle? At what point does the distinction of being a Hall of Famer begin to lose the exclusivity and weight that gives the honor its meaning in the first place? These are questions being asked now, and they are not going away. As an illustration of just how significantly the landscape has shifted, consider the case of current active driver William Byron. As of this reporting, Byron has accumulated 16 career Cup Series victories and 2 Daytona 500 championships. He does not yet have a Cup Series title. And yet, based on the trends that have been observed in recent Hall of Fame classes, the suggestion has been raised that if Byron were to retire from competition today, his career statistics would potentially place him on a trajectory toward eventual Hall of Fame consideration. Whether one views that as a reflection of Byron's genuine accomplishments or as a sign that standards have shifted more than they perhaps should have is at the heart of this debate. The question being raised is not whether these drivers deserve recognition. The question is whether the Hall of Fame is the appropriate tier of recognition or whether some form of secondary acknowledgement, something akin to what has been proposed in other sports, such as a Hall of Very Good, might better serve the goal of preserving the Hall of Fame status as the absolute pinnacle of achievement in the sport. These are the conversations now unfolding within the NASCAR community, and they will only grow louder as future ballots take shape. We turn to a development that has disappointed a significant portion of the NASCAR fan base: the confirmed end of an annual tradition at one of the sport's most historic tracks. Throwback Weekend at Darlington Raceway, as fans have known it for the past decade, has officially come to a close. We will detail exactly what has changed, why it happened, and what, if anything, remains of the tradition that gave the Spring Darlington race its unique identity. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue now with our coverage of the latest developments shaping the NASCAR landscape, and we turn our attention to a story that has resonated deeply with fans who have followed the sport closely over the past decade. Darlington Raceway, one of the oldest and most revered tracks on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule, has long held a special place in the hearts of racing enthusiasts. Known as too tough to tame, the track carries with it a history that stretches back to the earliest days of organized stock car racing in America. For many years, that history was honored in a very specific and visually striking way during the spring race weekend held at the facility. That tradition, as it has been known and celebrated, is now officially over. Bob Pockrass, a recognized reporter within the NASCAR media landscape, confirmed with NASCAR that teams will no longer be asked to run official throwback paint schemes for the March race at Darlington Raceway. The rumors that had been circulating within the NASCAR community in the weeks and months prior to this confirmation have now been officially verified. Throwback Weekend at Darlington, in the form that fans came to know and anticipate over the course of the past decade, has come to an end. The announcement, while not entirely unexpected given the speculation that preceded it, nonetheless landed as a significant moment for a fan base that had embraced the tradition with considerable enthusiasm. To understand the weight of this development, it is important to appreciate what Throwback Weekend represented to the people who followed it year after year. The concept was straightforward in its appeal but rich in its execution. Teams competing in the spring race at Darlington would design their race cars to visually pay tribute to iconic paint schemes, sponsors, and liveries from NASCAR's past. The result was a paddock and a field of race cars that served as a rolling museum of the sport's history. For a single weekend each year, the modern NASCAR garage was transformed into something that bridged the past and the present in a way that few other events on the calendar could replicate. Fans engaged with Throwback Weekend in a manner that went beyond passive viewership. There was active participation in the experience, debating which teams had produced the most accurate and visually faithful tributes to the schemes they were honoring, evaluating the creativity and attention to detail that went into each design, and equally scrutinizing the entries that fell short of the standard that the concept demanded. That engagement was genuine, organic, and consistent from year to year. It gave the Spring Darlington race something that is difficult to manufacture and impossible to fake, a real identity that fans cared about and looked forward to. That identity is now gone in its official form. According to the confirmed reporting, Darlington will continue to celebrate the history of the sport. Parades, appearances by former drivers, and tribute events will still be part of the race weekend experience. Additionally, teams that wish to voluntarily run throwback style paint schemes are still permitted to do so. The practice has not been prohibited. However, it is no longer a coordinated, officially encouraged focal point of the event. The distinction between a mandated tradition and an optional one is significant. When an event has a defined identity and that identity is no longer officially reinforced, the natural outcome over time is that the identity fades. The business reasoning behind this decision has been acknowledged and is not difficult to understand, even for those who are disappointed by the outcome. The economics of NASCAR sponsorship operate at a scale that places considerable weight on brand visibility and consistency. Major sponsors invest substantial financial resources, figures that reach into the millions of dollars, for the brand recognition that comes with having their logos and visual identities displayed prominently on race cars throughout the course of a season. A request to alter, adjust, or subordinate that visual identity for an entire race weekend, even with logos remaining intact, presents a genuine complication for the marketing and communications departments of large corporate sponsors. The challenge is not simply aesthetic. For companies that maintain strict brand guidelines and invest heavily in ensuring that their visual identity is presented consistently across all platforms and all contexts, the request to modify the color palette, design language, or overall presentation of their branding even temporarily creates logistical and approval challenges that are not trivial. Even when the core logo remains on the car, adjusting the surrounding design to reflect a vintage or throwback aesthetic means that the overall impression of the car does not match the standard brand presentation those sponsors have approved and paid to project. For corporate marketing departments operating within structured approval processes, that is a meaningful obstacle. And yet, the loss of the tradition does not sit easily with the segment of the fan base that valued it most. The spring race at Darlington has always operated in the shadow of its more famous counterpart on the calendar. The Southern 500, held in September at the same track, is widely regarded as one of the crown jewel events in all of NASCAR. It carries with it a history and a prestige that places it among the most important races of any given season. The spring race at Darlington, by contrast, has always carried the burden of comparison. It shares a venue with one of the sport's most legendary events, and that comparison is not one it has ever been fully able to escape. Throwback Weekend was for a decade the answer to that challenge. It was the identity that gave the spring race at Darlington its own reason for being, its own personality, its own place in the conversation. Without it as an official focal point, the question of what distinguishes the Spring Darlington race from any other intermediate track event on the schedule becomes more difficult to answer. It is a question that the sport will now need to address in some form, because the absence of a defined identity for any race on the calendar is a challenge that affects not just attendance and ratings for that specific event, but the overall narrative coherence of the season as a whole. The comparison to the spring race at Bristol Motor Speedway has been drawn as a parallel worth considering. Bristol, like Darlington, hosts two events on the Cup Series calendar each year. The night race at Bristol, held in the fall, carries an identity and a prestige that is well established and widely recognized. The spring race at Bristol has historically struggled to achieve the same level of distinction. In an effort to give the spring Bristol event its own identity, NASCAR introduced a dirt surface for the race for a period of seasons, fundamentally altering the character of the event in search of something that would make it stand apart. The parallels between that situation and the current reality at Darlington are clear. What remains to be seen is whether teams and sponsors, acting voluntarily and without official coordination, choose to preserve any meaningful version of the throwback spirit in the spring Darlington race going forward. The possibility exists that some teams will continue to embrace retro inspired designs of their own accord, and that a degree of the tradition's original appeal could survive in that informal capacity. Whether that voluntary participation will be consistent enough and widespread enough to sustain any real sense of the event's former identity is a question that only time and future race weekends will answer. What is clear as of this reporting is that the official chapter of Throwback Weekend, as it was formally organized and celebrated for the better part of a decade, has now closed. A tradition that gave thousands of NASCAR fans a reason to look forward to a specific race weekend each spring and that gave the sport a rare opportunity to honor its own history in a visible and creative way, has been brought to an end for business reasons that, while understandable, have not made the outcome any easier to accept for those who valued what the tradition represented. That development alone would be enough to generate significant conversation within the NASCAR community. But the story we turn to next carries with it a weight that extends even further into the legal arena, the personal, and the very heart of what it means to operate a race team within the structure of the sport. Richard Childress, the legendary team owner and one of the most recognizable figures in NASCAR history, has spoken publicly for the first time following the conclusion of an antitrust trial that, by any measure, produced some of the most startling revelations the sport has seen in recent memory.